Welcome back to WagerTalk.com. Friday Sweet 16 preview. We're going to take a look at 3 games here, and then we'll have a second video where we look at the marquee matchup for the Friday games. I'm going to start with you, Scott. We're looking at West Virginia and Villanova in this first matchup. West Virginia, they had an easy road to get here with the Marshall upset of Wichita State, and a team that West Virginia knows from their own state with Marshall, so they might not have looked past them. Maybe if Wichita State did, they knew not to. But Villanova, everything as expected with Villanova. A couple easy wins, early round game. They didn't have to face a tough opponent in Radford, and then really ran Alabama out of the building. Can West Virginia stay with Villanova in this one?
I thought it's funny when you talk about Marshall and West Virginia, because Dave Koken and I do the daily radio show in Las Vegas, and we've been talking all season long about how slow-footed Wichita State looked. And it caught up to them against Marshall in that particular game. They just looked slow. And then you had Marshall going against West Virginia, and West Virginia caught, I thought, the perfect matchup because of the style of defense that they play, the high-stress, high-pressure defense that Huggy Bear likes to throw at opponents, and they forced Marshall into 18 turnovers. I like the matchup so much, we had it at WagerTalk. In fact, I don't believe that type of defensive play is going to work against Jay Wright's team, so they're going to have to change things up a little bit. I mean, you've got Brunson, DiVincenzo for Jay Wright for Villanova, who have combined for like 300 assists on the season. These guys don't turn it over. They've got a 2-to-1, combined 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. They've seen some of the best play on the court, night in, night out, playing in a very good Big East Conference. They've got 6 players in double figures, 2 outstanding dishers, as I mentioned, and ball handlers. And guys, I think it's just too many outs for Villanova, for West Virginia to be able to play that same kind of basketball and come away with even a cover, let alone a win.
Yeah, Ralph, you look at this West Virginia team, and we know the MO. They're a team that plays that pressure defense. But if you can crack that initial pressure, a lot of times it turns into quick, easy transition baskets. And as Scott alluded to with the ball handlers, they've got 2 good guards. Brunson and Bridges are their 2 top scorers, their guards. They should be able to handle this press and set up some easy buckets for Villanova in this game.
They will be able to handle the press. And then not only do you handle the press, you break the press, and then you have 4 players that shoot over 39% from three-point land. That'll just eat up the press. I mean, when you can break the press and dish it out and throw in some threes, I think West Virginia basically is a poor man's Villanova. The game in Boston, you're going to have a Villanova backing. You're going to have Villanova having played the better schedule, prepared them better. The Big East is a brutal schedule with a lot of good defensive teams. Besides a few in the Big 12, you haven't had that. West Virginia hasn't had that team that comes back and presses them and plays a lot of defense, besides Baylor at times or Texas Tech. But that's not that Villanova defense. So for me, it's chalk here with the Wildcats.
Kelly, looking at Villanova, they are, as Ralph said, they hit it from 3. They're ranked 12th in the country from 3-point range. They're ranked number 5 in the country overall, shooting 50.3% on the year. Obviously, West Virginia hasn't had to face an offense like that so far in the tournament, but they have faced some good teams in the Big 12 that can put the ball up in the, go up and down the floor and score at will. Do they have a chance in here against Villanova?
Everybody knows I'm always trying to make a case for the Dogs, and I sat and looked at this game so many times last night, and I'm like, but press Virginia. That's all we ever hear in the Big 12, and I'm so sick of hearing it because, like Ralph said, this number 1 seeded Wildcats team is absolutely going to break that apart, and it makes me a little nervous to back the dog here. I did make the game 5, which seems low in comparison to other people's numbers I compared with. So for me, I'm going to stay off, but I think I will end up probably being on the Wildcats come Friday.
Preston, we've seen some games this year where West Virginia, where they've played a super first half and then teams adjusted to the press and was able to open it up in the second half, and West Virginia hasn't been able to close games. Case in point, 2 games against Kansas this year, actually all 3 games against Kansas, including the championship game in the Big 12. They had leads late and weren't able to hold them. Kentucky, when they faced them earlier this year, they played a game. They dominated the first half against Kentucky, and then Kentucky ran them out of the building in the second half. How do you see this win from a numbers standpoint in your breakdown of the game?
Yeah, I think 5.5 is actually a little high with Kelly. My number was right under 5, so actually think the number's fair enough where I'm not going to probably get involved at all. But I will say this about West Virginia in general, and to your point about second halves, when they're playing teams that actually have some NBA talent, Kentucky's a good example. Villanova would be. At least Bridges is going to be back lottery, middle first-round pick. They probably have one or other two guys that'll get a shot. The press isn't really effective. Every once in a while you can force a turnover. I'd actually be shocked if West Virginia personally actually pressed all game. Like, I actually just don't think they will.
I mean, they can't.
Villanova, even if they did, at least Huggins needs to be smart enough if 2-3 minutes in, it's 9-2 to like back off, and you need to slow the game down and try to get stops. Because they're still, I think there's like 24th or 25th in defensive efficiency in the half court. Like, they're still a really good defensive team because they pressure you and they're physical. And especially if they're getting, like Marshall fans I saw complaining there were no foul calls.
Sure.
And so if they're able to get away with whatever, then it's going to be tough to score on them and you're going to turn it over a lot. So I'd be surprised if they actually pressed. And so I'm not sure there's going to be as much of a mismatch as far as Villanova breaking the press down and getting open threes or layups or forcing fouls and stuff. And I think it's going to be more of a half-court game, which makes me look a little bit at the under. The number's fair, I think, though, around 153 to 154. It's moved up a little. But anyway, that's probably my favorite bet in the game is to look to the under. But it's one that I can wait and see what West Virginia's doing in-game and attack it, or if like they're just sagging back after makes and they're not really pressing like they normally do, then I'll be looking at playing under at that point. I don't have to make the bet before the game starts.
Marco, one more thing. I think we talked about West Virginia. They were a good matchup against Marshall. They extended a lot of energy, though. That's a huge game for those West Virginia kids, is to make sure they weren't embarrassed against Marshall and to play 100%. And they played that game late Sunday night, so they're the ones that has the least rest of all of this, playing in that big emotional game against in-state little brother. I think that takes something out of them as well.
Good point, Ralph. In moving to the next game for Friday, Texas Tech and Purdue, and this is one of the few regions where things are going as planned, as we've got a number 2 seed facing a number 3 seed here. Purdue, they were able to survive Sunday without their big guy. Isaac Haas was injured in the Cal State Fullerton game on Friday and is done for the tournament. Can they do it 2 games in a row? I'm going to go to you, Ralph. Does it catch up to them here not having the big guy?
You're looking at me, to Jimmy Ralph, or Preston?
You, Preston.
Ralph, Preston Ralph.
Well, yeah,
sorry, maybe he was in the middle here. So I have a lot of things I could say. I know we're short on time because we still have a third game. But there were 3 teams I harped on all year that I just thought were generally overrated. Arizona, I didn't think it was very good. Auburn, and then Texas Tech. And I thought it was especially evident when Keenan Evans went out for a few games. I think they dropped 3 in a row. Gray even missed a game or 2 in that stretch. And what I always had said was that Texas Tech, as far as their offense goes, they don't scheme and do anything. There's really no X's and O's to it. They're outside the top 70 on offensive efficiency. But they ultimately are just like an isolation team. And Keenan Evans is so good and just a valuable, he's probably a top 5 valuable player to his team, like Trae Young to Oklahoma. He's right there because he could just bail them out late in shot clocks. And their defense has been so good all year. It's 3rd or 4th in defense efficiency that they can stay in games and Evans bails them out. When they actually have to play a team that can score on them, like, say, Purdue, this is one I had circled when the brackets came out that I just absolutely, this would have been like an absolute banger for me, right? I just love Purdue in this matchup. They're going to score with them. And Texas Tech, I just don't think offensively can keep up. Well, Haas is a little bit of a worry. I read last night the Purdue engineering programs, like trying to make a brace that the NCAA will pass off and clear that he can wear and play. So he may end up playing. He almost played, I guess, against Butler anyway, but his brace he was wearing at the time didn't clear the NCAA. So this is one I think should be 3 if Haas plays at 1.5. It would definitely be a play just from a sheer numbers perspective, but I think the matchup just sets up so perfectly to hopefully just be right about Texas Tech's offense not being able to really keep up with Purdue. And if Haas plays, then even better. If he doesn't, then we're going to get a short number, and so I'll be on Purdue.
If he doesn't, just to jump in real quick, you still got Vince Edwards. I know there's a big drop-off. There's a big drop-off from rebounding-wise from Edwards to the next guy.
What you guys think, because I had the thought against Butler, like if he can't shoot and he's in there, he kind of clogs. Like he's good, he's a big body, he can rebound and play D. But it's not going to be great for the offense if he's in there trying to be a decoy and he can't even hit a 3-foot
The flow may not be as good with him as
the redshirt freshman, Matt Harms. I mean, 7'3", played great. He's just a guy that he was highly recruited, just didn't play because Haas was there. Now all of a sudden you're seeing perhaps potential that, it's not that much of a downgrade. Obviously you don't want to lose Haas, but it's a kid that stepped up in the situation and may be close where it's
At least
not a huge loss.
offensively,
Yes, yeah.
I would take that isolation stuff with Chris Beard at UNLV, though. We had him for about a half an hour over Marvin Menzies any day, but I get what you're saying. I mean, it is a lot of isolation.
The thing with Oz is he was their second leading scorer, but of the starters, he played the fewest minutes. He averaged only 23 minutes a game for Purdue this year. So we have that point. Kelly, I'll go to you. You're the Big 12 girl here. Texas Tech, they had that slide at the end of the season, and we did it on the podcast. We did, Scott, with Dave Koken and I, that we talked about when they played that Kansas rematch, which was for the whole, in essence, was for the Big 12 title. They had, all season, they had their claws on the title for the Big 12. And once they lost that game and Kansas was in control of their own destiny, it was like put the fork in Texas Tech for the rest of the regular season. It was like they just mailed it in and was waiting for the rest of for the conference tournament and, of course, the big dance. Do you think they have a shot here?
You know, I'd like to back Texas Tech here, but I really don't have any good viable reason. And then sitting here listening to you guys even made me even more to say, you know what, either this is a no play or you got to be on Purdue. I made the game 1. I was trying to lean towards the Red Raiders and find some value here, but like you said, I don't feel like this Texas Tech team has really given all that they've got in this tournament. They haven't really been forced to play really tough ball, and this Purdue team.
They were tied against Stephen F. Austin, right, with like 2.5 minutes left.
Yeah, exactly. But towards the final score really isn't indicative of that.
Yeah,
I mean,
10,
SFA got the cover, but sure. Still, Texas Tech, I felt like they weren't playing their best basketball, and Purdue is going to force that from them. So again, it kind of goes back to this toss-up. But I think what you guys all said makes the most sense, and Texas Tech is going to lose this game.
Ralph,
you know, I like the under in this game. You know, Purdue, you look at the Big Ten, and there's no teams that really slow the tempo down. Not like the Wisconsins of old. Michigan State does, but besides that, there's a lot of teams in mid-tempo range. Texas Tech is 250 as far as tempo goes. Purdue's 230. You're moving to another NBA arena. You're playing a Boston TD Gardens. You're going to have sight lines in the first game. You're going to have a Keenan Evans who said it was 85% last game. And, you know, I'm thinking this is a game in the 60s that I'm going to look at the under as well as Purdue.
Just throw it out there. These two teams have been absolute money burners for their backers. Last 15 games, Purdue was 3-12 against the spread. Texas A&M, Texas Tech, 7-1 against the spread down the stretch.
You know, one thing to throw into this whole equation, let's say Haas doesn't go, and you know, because he might be the detriment on the offensive end, like you said, if that brace doesn't quite give him the freedom to operate offensively like normal. If he's gone, and I mentioned you do still have Vince Edwards, a good rebounder obviously for Purdue. There is a drop off, but Tech's not a good rebounding team. You know, that's not like their strength, and all of a sudden they're going to be better off because Haas is missing.
A&M or something. Who could
exactly,
just crush you
and they don't shoot free throws well. You know, what do they make in the last 5-6 games? Like 13 out of 20 per game or whatever. And you're talking about a 1.5 point spread. So if the game is kind of close to what the spread actually, you know, is right now at 1.5 or 2, it might become a situation where Tech goes to the charity stripe over the last 10 minutes, 5 minutes of this game, and they hit their normal 60% or 65%, and it ends up being what I got a game that I think is going to be around the number, and it's a game like, you know, let's say anybody can win this game by 2 or 3 points if it's one of those kind of games. I better have a team that I know is going to shoot 70% or better more often than not from the charity stripe, and that's not Tech right now.
Let's move into the last game we're going to cover in this video. We've got Clemson and Kansas. You got a number 1-5 matchup here. You know, Kansas, we expected them to be here. Clemson, I didn't see that. I thought Clemson had a shot against Auburn. I didn't think they were going to take them the way they took them pillar to post. You talk about maybe the most complete game we've seen out of Clemson this season. Kelly, were you shocked at the way they handled Auburn?
You know, I didn't even get to watch the game. I was too focused on driving home so I could watch the K-State game outside of the sports book. I left like in the middle of the first half, and then
the game was already over by then.
Right, and then I get home and I'm like, oh dear Lord, like what happened? And that is what makes me a little bit nervous here in this spot. Everybody knows that I'm this KU hater, and I always bet against KU. That's not true. Anyway, that being said, I feel like Clemson may be the trendy dog pick here. So at first glance, I was like, okay, I got to be really strong in this game. On my numbers, I made the game 2. We just talked about Ken Palm. He made the game 1. And I'm going, what am I missing here? Like I said, I'd said on Twitter that KU did not deserve to be the 1 seed, in my opinion and other respected opinions. I'm a little nervous. I think Devontae Graham is going to be the X factor here. if the Tigers can just slow him down just enough, I think they can win this game. I think it's going to be a really close, tight game, and I'm probably going to be on Clemson getting 4.5.
All right, we go to you, Ralph. You look at this one, and when we talk ACC basketball and we talk about defense, Virginia is what we talk about. But I'll tell you what, this Clemson team, they are a good defensive team. Down the stretch, last 12 games, they held 10 of their 12 opponents to 42% or less, 8 of those 10 under 39%. If they can get that kind of defensive performance and slow this Kansas team down, can they stay in this game?
Yeah, if they're going to hold Kansas to 38% shooting, they can, but they're not. It's okay. Kansas has too many weapons. It's again, Kansas is a tested team. They're not Auburn. They're not Auburn that relies on 1 or 2 scores. You shut down those scores, and there's no one else on the Tigers bench that could score. Now, I'm not a Kansas fan, so I've gone back and forth in this game. And again, I'm going to look at the under. I think 143. I think Clemson is going to slow the pace. The issue you're going to have is, the worry about these unders with a team that's offensively inept. You get behind by 10, you start fouling, it's going to extend the clock, and there goes your under. But, I'm going to hope that at least, I'm going to look at betting the first half under in this game. I think Clemson slows the pace. They know they can't keep up with Kansas. And Kansas is happy playing slow or fast. They're one of those teams that can adjust. And I think we see a lower scoring first half for sure.
Scott, I look at this Kansas team, and to me, them in Kentucky, it's the same MO. They started slow, got stronger. Now, Kansas wasn't as bad as Kentucky was earlier, but at the end of the season, these were 2 of the hottest teams in the country. They rolled off 10 of their last 11 games victory. The only loss, just like Kentucky, was the season finale, a meaningless game. They already had the Big 12 locked up when they went to Oklahoma State and got drilled. Everything else has been good for Kansas. Do they keep it going here?
Well, it's funny you mentioned how they started slow. I remember go all the way back to November 10th, the weekend of November 10th, 11th, and 12th, when they played in that little 4-game tournament where you had all the big teams, in there. And I'm going, boy, I know this is a situation where they obviously got a ton of time and a nice schedule to be able to strengthen what they're doing. But at the time, I'm thinking this team looks like an overvalued team that will not get past the Sweet 16. They draw a team in Clemson. You better force Kansas into turnovers and mistakes if you're going to be the Jayhawks at this point. The teams that beat them over the course of the season, we're talking like Arizona State when they're playing well, Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, the most recent loss to Oklahoma State. Kansas turned the ball over 48 times in those 3 games combined, 17, 16, and 15 in those games. Problem with Clemson, you look at their last 5 games, they're not turning the ball over. They're not getting the opponent to turn the ball over. They're averaging less than 8 forced turnovers per game in the last 5 games. They've got to pick it up as far as against Kansas ball handlers to be able to win this basketball, contest. Now, that doesn't mean they can't cover the 4.5, but when I'm laying 4, 4.5, 3.5 in that range, or I should say when I'm taking, I want an underdog that I think can win the game outright. And I think they've got to be able to force turnovers. They've had 2 great first halves. I mean, they jump out early to New Mexico State and Auburn. If they don't jump out early in this one, it might be a situation where, let's say it's a 4 or 5 point Kansas game, but you can feel the flow going to Kansas late in the first half. It might be a good spot to jump in game because Clemson hasn't had to deal with coming from behind at all in their first 2 games. And if they're not forcing the Jayhawks into turnovers, boy, the way this team has shot lights out the last 5 games, they've made 10 out of 22 3-pointers on average in the last 5 games. They're going to be a tough nut to crack for Clemson if they can't force the turnovers.
Preston, you look at Kansas, they hit 40.3% from 3-point range. That's a good way to bust up a defense that's, is what you need to stay in the game. And if they can extend that lead and get Clemson out of their comfort zone, what happens?
I think it would be actually really important because Clemson hasn't had to play from behind yet, obviously in this tournament. But even since Grantham went out with his ACL injury out for the year, he's kind of that guy they can lean on in those spots where they haven't had now for, it's been 5 or 6 weeks. But against Kansas, if you're down 5-7, 5 minutes into the game, or it even gets to double digits, it's weird. It's one of those spots where you're talking about looking in game. If it gets to that point and people say, well, why wouldn't you have just bet Kansas before the game? But if Kansas did take a 10 or 11 point lead and it just feels like, no turnovers being forced from Clemson and they look lost on offense because they don't know who to turn to, I might lay an in-game -9.5 or something on Kansas, even though it's a worse number than before the game started. So this is one I haven't bet, and I don't think I'll be betting, but I am going to look live because Clemson shot ridiculously well against Auburn as well as New Mexico State, and I had +5.5 in that first game. You know, I thought the number was too high, and the market, said that was true, and then they just played a lot better than Mexico State did, and Auburn was even worse. So you have to give them credit for where they're at, but I just don't think they have enough without Grantham to beat a Kansas team, whether they're supposed to be a 1 or a 2 seed. I think it's a correct number. Actually, mine was 4, so I think it's close enough just to pass.
Do you think the physical game against Seton Hall helps Kansas here? Does playing 2 physical teams in a row help a team?
They got enough
when they have
time
the 4
to
days
rest,
off.
I think 4 days off is fine.
Yeah,
I mean,
maybe if they're playing the physical team on the back-to-back games on the weekend,
with 1 day off between.
But I think it helps Kansas in the situation of having played a very physical Seton Hall team and now being able to handle Kansas a couple days later.
Anyone here lay Kansas a couple days ago?
I had Seton Hall. Yeah, I was.
2 Seton Hall bets.
Wasn't in.
I wasn't on the. I wasn't
That's
on
good.
the side.
So everyone can.
Everybody's
Round of
happy.
applause.
Nobody's upset about that.
I didn't bet it, but it was one of the craziest endings.
Yeah, I was at Caesar Saturday night, and the place just absolutely
a step
erupted.
back fadeaway 3.
Yeah.
Of course, it's going in.
Ask Michigan, right there. All of those go in.
Good stuff, guys and ladies. We're going to have another video for you guys. We'll have taken a look at the Syracuse-Duke game next. And don't forget, guys, every Tuesday at WagerTalk, we take one capper, take the hottest capper, and we offer his best bet for just $2. Great way to introduce yourself to a new capper or just get a nice best bet for $2. And don't forget, if you like our videos, do us a favor, hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and be sure to share it with all your friends. Back with Duke and Syracuse next.